do the introduction. Good evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. I'm delighted. I'm delighted even to be joined by Bridget, who is also known as her pen name as JJ Green. So thank you for joining us, Bridget. It's a real pleasure this evening. And Bridget's got some sound effects going off in the background. So if we hear some squeals, it could be my end, which I've got trick-or-treaters outside, or it could be Bridget's end, who's got fireworks going off. So yeah, you might have some added bonuses tonight. So your book, Someone to Blame, came out this week.
Yeah, Monday.
Yeah. So would you like to introduce it and yourself?
Okay. Karen, thanks for having me on. And my name's Bridget, but I go by the name of JJ Green. That's my pen name. So this is my second book to be published. The last one was called The Last Good Summer, and that was out in 2023, just last year. But Someone to Blame is really like it's a mystery thriller, or maybe a psychological thriller, some people have called it. And it follows the journey of Shay Dunn. She gets tragic news and she basically wants someone to blame for that. So she comes up with this mad scheme to send kind of a generic poison pen letter, like an anonymous letter, to a couple of people that she blames the most for what's gone wrong in her life. The thing is, she doesn't really anticipate the consequences of doing that. And the letters then take on a whole life of their own, and they create a whole series of calamities that are just beyond her control. And so the book then goes on to deal with all of that. So it looks at the themes really of grief, loss, and family, but it also looks at the secrets that people hide and how it's their own guilt really that causes them to react to the letters. It's not really the letters themselves. And I just thought the idea of writing about a poison pen was kind of intriguing. That whole idea is kind of interesting to me. And I did hear a story when I was really young that my mother told me that about a woman who'd sent these anonymous letters to people in her village, and it caused a lot of hurt there. And the story always kind of stuck with me. And what I like about the poison pen idea too is that, can you hear that? I live in Derry, so in Ireland, and it's like massive kind of Halloween thing. So like it's the biggest night of the year here in Derry.
Oh, really?
So it like goes nuts. But I think the idea of a poison pen can really only work in a small place or a small community where everybody knows everybody else, because otherwise it would be kind of meaningless. So and then these letters kind of maybe reveal that they don't really know each other that well at all. But yeah, so that's kind of the basics about the
yeah. No, it's a great book. As we said just before we came on, that I've been reading it this week. It's really really gripping, and I really like we'll talk about the characters in a second, but we were talking again about sort of unlikable characters, which some feature in the book, so we won't go too much into that. But I really, so what sort of, you were inspired really by the sort of the tale of what your mum had told you, but you also reference one of my favorites, the sort of moving finger of Agatha Christie in the book as well. And I was also thinking about the one that Wicked Little Lies, I think it's called, with Olivia Colman.
Yeah, that was a recent one that came out. It was kind of more like I saw that it was kind of lighthearted. It was more kind of dark humor. But it's
this one's darker, isn't it?
Mine's is dark. There's not too much humor in it. It does go mental. But yeah, it is kind of, you do see it in literature, the idea of a poison pen, and the Christie story is one that I'm really familiar with. I like a lot of her work, so it does hark back to that. But then I suppose for me, it's really got it's got that link to a real story that I heard as well.
Yeah.
And how people really actually maybe do this in real life, you know?
Yeah. Because I mean, Shay. Let's talk about Shay. So she's the main character in the book, and like you say, she gets given some quite horrific news at the beginning of the book, but she's also dealing with her son Rory being missing. So she's going through a lot, isn't she? She's dealing with a lot of sort of anxiety about her health, about her son being missing, and then something happens and that sort of escalates that sort of, like you said, anger, grief. When I was writing it down, revenge. She wants all of those things. And to be honest, when you find out what she's going through, you don't really blame her. You think, well, I think if I was in her position, I would feel all of those feelings.
Yeah, definitely, you would feel those things. And you might find, because of her illness as well, you might end up thinking, maybe I don't have much of a chance here to get some justice from all of this. So
Yeah.
she latches onto this this idea of the poison pen. And I think she, I suppose what's different about this is that from the outset, you know who the poison pen is. So it's not like usually those stories, it's like, who is the poison pen? And everybody's going mad to find that out. The reader is the only person that knows, because we're seeing Shay's story. Nobody else knows it's her. So it's kind of, I thought that was maybe an interesting way to do it as well, that you're seeing the motivations for it, and maybe that the person who's written the poison pen letters isn't the worst person in the story either. Usually they're kind of the main baddie, causing all this angst and upset among people. But really, she's not really the baddie in it. She has done this thing and it's not really that nice, but as you say, you can kind of nearly let her away with that because of what's happening. But she's not really the worst person in the story. There are people in the village that have a lot more to hide than she does. Yeah.
Because actually you sort of, you sympathize and empathize with her. And actually when she sort of does it the first time, she sort of does it, and she does it in a moment of sort of, sort of grief, and, she's not really thinking about what she's doing. And then she sort of remembers that the next morning she gets up and realizes that she's actually done this thing, and she's like, oh, well, I might as well send him anyway.
Yeah, it's like she's kind of she gets drunk, and she's just like little in her own head and just feeling really angry, and just does this thing in an impulse, and then passes out. And then when she wakes up, the letters are still there, but she hasn't posted them. Obviously, she didn't go out in the middle of the night drunk and try to find a letterbox. But she kind of thinks, she's almost in two minds. Should she bother doing it? And then she thinks, oh well, what harm is it really going to do? I'll just do it. So what? And she doesn't really want the people that she sends the letters to know it's her. And she doesn't actually think they'll guess it's her, because she believes that they'll have so many other things that they want to hide, or that they've done wrong, that they'll never even suspect it's about her and what's going on with her, and what she feels they've done to her. So that's kind of her motivations and her thinking about it. And she knows it's a bit juvenile, but she does it anyway.
Well, I think she's at the point where she hasn't really got anything to lose, has she? She's sort of, she's at sort of rock bottom, really. And I thought was really interesting as well is like as you said, who the poison pen is, but you also get to see the reaction of the people who she sends the letters to. And also, as the reader, you don't really know everything about what they already have done or what they have done, and the letters are quite like, I know what you've done, and then we sort of we unravel stuff that we didn't know what they've done. So was that quite fun to write? Was that quite sort of?
It definitely was. I mean, because you can basically make up whatever you want. You can have these people be, you can have what they're hiding be something kind of trivial that they're more embarrassed
Yeah.
about, or something actually quite serious, and you can bring in all sorts of things. So I thought it was fun to have a kind of a group of characters that would all react in their own way and be so kind of self-absorbed that
Yeah.
they would think, oh, it's this thing, the thing that's maybe on their mind most. And it was just fun to try and come up with the different types of things that they could possibly be, that they could possibly have done and that they're trying to hide.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just, I was able to kind of really go to town on that.
Yeah.
So some of the stuff is kind of just silly, and then there's some of it that is actually quite sinister, and it
Yeah.
has consequences as well. Um, and I don't think everybody, it doesn't end in a way that, or maybe I'm jumping ahead of things now, but it doesn't really end in a way that's saying everybody gets what they deserve and it's all tied up in a neat bow.
Yeah.
I think things do get resolved, but everything's not just the happy ever after at the end, which I like to kind of always keep. I don't like things to be too tied up at the end or too
Yeah.
happy for everybody. I think that I try to make it like a realistic ending that you would expect in life. It's
Yeah.
ambiguity.
Sometimes it can be a bit, you can feel like it's a bit contrived, can't you? Because like you say, generally in life, things don't end up all tied up neatly in a bow.
Yeah.
And actually, for the things that are happening to Shay and the things that have happened to her, it's not gonna resolve, is it? Really, it's not gonna just, it's not gonna go away.
No, exactly. I mean, it's yeah, her situation is going in its own direction, regardless of
Yeah.
these letters, and but she changes as she goes along as well. I mean, she goes
Yeah.
on a journey which a good character is supposed to do, and she goes on that journey, and she changes how she feels about things towards the end, and so for her there is a kind of maybe an acceptance,
Yeah.
and I hope it doesn't feel like it's too horrible, but it's yeah, I hope it kind of is satisfying enough that you go, that probably
Yeah.
would be fair enough.
I think I really liked her as a character because she's got lots of sort of layers to her, and she's been a single mum, and she's got the most, as we said before, odious. Well, he wasn't her father-in-law because she never actually married her, the Rory's father, but his father, Peter, who is probably one of the most loathsome characters. So, was we said before that he was quite fun to write? Was it quite fun to write the nasty ones?
Yeah, as I was saying to you, I find them more fun, and it's actually easier to write them. Well, that's how
Yeah.
I find it anyway. That it's because you can get into a real flow and you can make this person absolutely horrible. Whereas I think when you're looking after your main character, that you have to. I mean, you don't want to have a cartoon villain either.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a balance. So even with Peter, I think there's parts where you can see that he's just this ambitious, self-absorbed person. And even when he does things that he says are for
Yeah.
his family, you're kind of going, it's kind of not. It's still a bit, me-centered. But I still would like to think that there's parts of the story where you're kind of feeling, you see a bit of humanity coming through from him as well, that he learned something along the way.
Yeah.
But you definitely, for me, it's a lot easier to write these characters um, that are that are more the villains of the piece,
Yeah.
because you've just got more scope with them, and you can have them getting into all sorts of situations. And um, I like to kind of think of people I've met in my own life that, I just think, I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
they're not maybe as bad as the people in the book, but you can definitely get their traits, and use them to great effect.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of draw from, well, I do, and I draw from personal experience of people I've met along the way that I just think, oh God, I wish I'd never met them. But that I found use for them. I use them in
You can
books.
use them in your
So,
books now.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's quite, when you sort of come up with the idea, sort of, you knew that sort of, you were going to write a book about, someone with a poison pen, and so you obviously, so when are you are you a planner? Are you a sort of a go as do you know from the beginning how it's going to sort of pan out?
I find that I do have to plan a good bit. I I suppose going on different creative writing courses, you're told different techniques that you can use, and you learn so much about the craft of writing. Um, a lot of people think, because you write, you can physically write, and you've
Yeah.
learned how to do that from school, that you can just write fiction as well. And it's not quite the same thing there. It's a craft like anything else that you can learn the skills of, and you can improve on them, and get better yourself. But one of the tools that I definitely picked up through creative writing courses was like a planning tool. It is really
Yeah.
very simple thing. It's like a table, but you keep track of all the different scenes in the book, and then what you want the scenes to have, and that is so important for me. That's almost like my roadmap for any book. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I decide that at the very beginning. I stick to that strictly,
No.
and I can't move off it. But what it does, it at least gives me a map to start from, and
Yeah.
it's moving in a direction. And then as I go along, maybe I see where this isn't working. I have to go back and rework something. But this tool that I use, it keeps track of the whole book. So it's almost like a bird's eye view of what I'm writing.
Yeah.
And it's a marker for each scene, and each scene is developing the story. And then I can see, does that scene actually develop the story, or is it just a filler? Is it actually
Yeah.
progressing anything? Um, People that, when you get to the middle of the book and it starts to just fall flat, and you run out of steam.
Yeah.
This was a way for me to prevent that happening, because I
Yeah.
had things planned out. And it allows you to keep track of changes you want to make and things you need to go back and do. So that's how my mind works. I have to
Yeah.
have the plan. I know some people, I don't know how they do it. It's brilliant that they can just start, and it's all in their head, and they can do it that way.
Yeah.
I can't. I need something on paper that
You need like a
guides me.
structure to sort of, to go from, even if it changes like as you go
Exactly.
along.
And it doesn't stifle your creativity, because you know, I have one line in the table, like just the row says, it's just a bullet point that kind of gives some kind of description, not even a
Yeah.
description, just a sense of this is what this scene is. But the whole creative bit has to then go into what goes into that scene, and how you're going to link it with everything else, and how it links into the overall plot. So and how you develop a character within a scene as well. So
Yeah.
all of that is going on. So anything that helps you kind of hold on to the structure and keep it in your head, that to me is only going to be a help, not
Yeah.
sort of something that's getting in the way of the creative process.
No, I think it is. It's. I mean, there's. I think there's much more. There's more people who are plotters than there are pantsers, as you call it. I think most people will have some sort of structure, whether it's like, I don't know, something like just a synopsis where they know, this book is about this, and it's going to go here, and it's going to end there. Something as basic as that, or something more, some people have a million post-it notes and
Yeah.
spreadsheets and pages and things like that. So I think it is really interesting how I find it really interesting how different people have different sort of strategies, and also like with creative writing and things, how those sort of techniques, because I've been on a few courses, and as you said, people teach very differently. So you go to
Mhm.
one and somebody will teach you one thing, but I think then you take out of those
Mhm.
things you want, don't you, as you go along?
Yeah, yeah. You don't. Um, I think that's the whole point of it, that you will pick out the pieces that you think are going to work for you.
Yeah.
So you don't pick out everything. You don't try to. It's not some kind of formulaic thing. It
No.
doesn't work like that. But yeah, I think everybody, because everybody's different and they approach it differently, they're going to get different things from
Yeah,
courses. And but I think it's worth doing courses because there are things that are maybe universal regardless. So there's a three-act structure. It's very hard to veer away from that unless you really know that really well. And then maybe you've got some idea about how you can veer away from it. But I think you need to be careful of doing that.
yeah,
But something like that that's kind of standard almost.
yeah,
And probably best not to mess with that. But
yeah,
things like how you actually plan out your book and how it
yeah.
unfolds for you, then that's like kind of you just cherry pick the tools and the techniques that work best for you and use them.
Yeah, no, sounds really good. So you wrote this book, so it's sort of set after the COVID pandemic, isn't it? So people are still wearing masks, and so did you write it like post? Did you write it during or post pandemic?
I had written it I had written it actually before the first book that got published. So
Oh,
it's been
really?
written a few years and then
Yeah.
I I'm currently writing another one, and I had started it, and then I thought, I really like that poison pen idea. I think I'm going to go back. So I did a ton of work on it. I mean, I probably almost like rewrote it from the original draft that I had from several years ago. So what I had to do was update the timeline as well. And then by the time I was rewriting, it was post COVID, and it's really difficult to write anything, I think, post COVID and not mention COVID.
Yeah.
Um, so I got a few bits in, not too much, but here and
No.
there, there's a bit about, anti vaxxers and,
Yeah.
people complaining about, and there's a busybody in the shop who kind of features, and she knows
Lovely
everybody's business.
Tracy.
Uh,
Lovely Tracy. I love the scene in the fish and chip shop. It made me laugh.
Yes. um, but not wearing the mask over your face, you've got it around your chin or something. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like if you're going to go to the bother of wearing this
Take it
annoying
on.
thing, at
Yeah.
least put it over your face. That was the point. And somebody like complains about that, so I kind of used things that were kind of coming up and
Yeah.
during COVID, and how people were feeling about it. So was able to put that in, and then how like the local bar. They got a grant to kind of do a beer garden outdoor
Yeah.
thing, and they benefited from that, but they're still trying to come back from that whole hiatus during COVID. And
Yeah.
so it's got a wee bit of that. I mean, it doesn't go into a huge amount of that, but I think it's kind of like you can't ignore COVID if you're writing something that's supposed to be contemporary, like
Yeah.
after the fact.
Yeah, no, I think it was just because you do. There's been quite a few different books that have got sort of like that theme, and this, like you say, it's not a theme, but it was just it sort of will. I guess in years to come, it will date it, won't it? Because it will be. But like you say, so does the Spanish flu or whatever. If you
Mm.
go back into history, you can't have a big sort of pandemic and then like just write it out of history because it doesn't really fit in with your book.
I know exactly, and I suppose if a story was going on shortly after COVID, those things would be there. So,
Definitely.
it made sense to put them in then, and it wasn't hard to do because we've lived through it, so we know the things that were happening, and
Yeah,
so
definitely. So place and setting. So is that sort of something that when you're planning out, where you're going to go with the book, is that something that you sort of stick to? So you write what you write about where you're from, and is that something that you think you'll carry on sort of doing?
probably. I I do tend to write stories that are based where I live.
Yeah,
So I live in the northwest of Ireland. I live in Derry City. I grew up a few miles away in another county that's more rural. And so I feature Derry and Donegal, where I'm from. I feature both in the stories that I write. And it's just easier for me to do that because that's the place I'm most familiar with.
yeah,
And also, I think there's like I didn't really notice this until I kind of had a look, but it just sort of jumped out at me one day that I write a lot about um, the coast features a lot, the sea features a lot.
Yeah.
Don't know why, because I can't swim and I would never swim in the Atlantic Ocean, let me tell you. But uh, I'd end up writing about that because we've got tons of beaches here, like just really close by, and some of them are really beautiful and they're really big and a lot of the time empty. So
Yeah.
you can go and have like a great walk on the beach, and it's just so invigorating, and it's just you feel like you're really in nature, and that I think that has a big impact on me. So I
Mm.
find myself writing those kind of places into my stories as well. So um, you know, it I think it adds to the story, maybe just roots it somewhere. And so
Yeah.
the place is almost like a character as well. I kind of a background character, but I do I do describe it and I do kind of give it its place, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe some authors, the place doesn't really matter. But I find the place always finds its way somewhere. It gets out, and I'm describing something, So I do like to have that dimension there as well.
Yeah, I enjoyed it because I obviously I live in Devon, so I'm sort of used to sort of that sort of, and I really enjoy going to different places. So I quite often listen to quite a lot of Scottish crime, and set in Edinburgh and Glasgow. So it was actually really nice to go to Ireland. I haven't been to Ireland for a while, so it was nice to go to Ireland and sort of hit. But also I think that sort of, if the characters are sort of rooted in that sense of place, and also that's you said about that sort of small town, that small place, and I've grown up in a small village, so I know that sort of,
Yeah,
everybody knows everything. You can't go outside your front door and somebody will know that you've gone outside your front door. But actually it makes it really interesting, that sort of people, being able to sort of put that, it doesn't feel alien at all. Whereas I guess if you were brought up in a city, that might feel like, well, would that happen? And you're like, well, yeah, yes, definitely.
it definitely would. It would. And I think in cities too, unless maybe somebody comes new to a place and they're in a very transient type of setting, but um, there are communities that develop in cities as well, because I think like we're social creatures, right? So we need that social connection, and we we don't fare well if we're completely alone or isolated.
No.
So I think even in big cities, you can see where maybe there's a more settled place that
Yeah.
there a kind of a wee community can develop there, and people do get to know each other. Um, be interesting to see if you could manage to do a poison pen in a city, but I just stuck to what I knew and
Yeah.
sort of
I guess
modeled
you
it
could,
on a.
if you did like on a housing estate or something, it's one of these sort of gated communities that they have now, you could definitely sort of do it in that, or even like a block of flats or something, you could probably.
Yeah, just a small self-contained place. I think
Yeah.
you could, or maybe it's like a workplace, a community sort of
Ah,
workplace or
yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
where,
yeah,
you
definitely
know,
workplace. Yeah,
it could work. I think people are people,
exactly.
we're the same wherever we go.
Yeah. So because in Shay's story, she's diagnosed with an illness, isn't she, at the beginning of the book?
Mhm.
And so how important was it for that you did you research her illness? Did you sort of, was that important to you to sort of be able to get that, accurate because of what she had?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go overboard on research. I
No.
did do a bit of research to identify the various symptoms, how it would start impacting a person, how long they would get from that. And I wanted to pick an illness as well that wasn't, um, it wasn't cancer. It wasn't what everybody
Yeah.
knows, and that it felt a bit different, and it would start to affect her faculties in a different way.
Yeah.
And in fact, it kind of affects memory and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
she sometimes wonders, you know, are things happening, and did she impact that, and she doesn't
Yeah.
remember, or so I kind of used it that way. But yeah, I did. I mean, I wanted to be accurate enough that,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any point in going into the details of
No.
writing up exactly every kind of symptom and how it's impacting somebody. You're not documenting an illness,
No.
but you want to actually write about it in a credible way that somebody goes, oh, that does seem like she's going through that.
Yeah.
So I think that, I researched it enough to be able to do that in a credible way. So that getting that balance between overloading with information that
Yeah.
it's just like reading something from
Like a textbook.
a textbook, and it's
Yeah.
not about. I've just been pulled out of the story here, out of the fantasy of what I'm reading.
Yeah.
So I like to try and get that balance. I'll try it anyway.
Yeah, no, I think it was as you say, it was really interesting to know that she had an illness that, I had heard of, but not, it wasn't something, that, it had sort of everyday illness. But actually it was really interesting how it affected her and how that sort of was woven into the story. I really liked that. Sort of, that it wasn't gratuitous. It had purpose in the story, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's like, well, that's what I was aiming for. Like,
Yeah.
and yeah.
So the other sort of characters in the story, there's Owen, isn't there, who's who was Rory's friend and his girlfriend, and then you've got Dan, who was Rory's dad, although he's not sort of he sort of did have a part in his life, but they weren't together. And his father is Peter, who we talked about. Who was the most challenging to write in the book?
I would say Shay herself,
Really?
yeah, because you don't want to write, like I was saying, you don't want to write cartoon villains, but at the same time, you don't want to write cartoon heroes either, like the goody two shoes, because I think they're just nobody's like that, and it's kind of a bit boring. Everybody's got ambiguity. There's good and bad, and it's about trying to balance that. And I always find that the kind of protagonist, the main protagonist, the hardest person to write, because you you don't want to you want the reader to care about them.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily like them, but at least care about what happens to them. So if you go too far in either direction, I think you could lose the reader. It's like, oh, she's too much of a goody two shoes, or she's just a horrible human being.
Yeah.
I don't care, and I don't care either way what happens to her now. So I'm conscious of like not losing the reader. That the reader still wants to know what happens in that person's story,
Yeah.
and doesn't feel that they're two dimensional. And I think that's hardest to do with the protagonist, because they're going to feature most, and you have to really try and bring them to life, make them as close to a real person as you can possibly do, and bear in mind that they're carrying the story, and they're supposed to be like the person that the reader is at least cares about. Like say something like Dexter, where the protagonist is a serial killer.
Yeah.
How good is the writing when you actually care about the serial killer, right? So it's like that. They don't have to be, there's things in them that they're characteristics where you end up really caring about them. And so it's like trying to write a character like that somehow the reader is going to care about what happens to them, no matter what kind of person they are. And I just find that, really focusing on that and trying to do that the best I can, that's a big challenge. And it's the biggest challenge with your most important character in the book.
And the thing is, I think we all like flawed characters, whether they're good people or bad people, and we're all flawed. We all have flaws. So I think those sorts of characters people identify with and sort of can sort of, if they're, like we said, if they're really good or horrifically bad to the point that they have no redeeming features, then you don't care about them either. So it's a real balance, isn't it, of like getting it, that sort of. And is that something that sort of happens as you write? Do you edit afterwards? With the characters? Do you think that you go back and think, actually, she wouldn't have done that, or he wouldn't have done that, or
Yeah, absolutely. I think I talked about the planning and stuff like that and having things. For me, the thing that you really can't plan that well are the characters. You can kind of sketch out
yeah,
what you think they are, but you're really, as a writer, you're getting to know them. It's weird, like, but you're getting to know them as you write. And
yeah,
then, some people say, oh, they start taking over the story. And in some ways they do, because you're writing the story then based on what you think this person would actually do, because they've developed their personality.
yeah,
They've really developed it. If you're doing the job right, they've developed in a way that you didn't know to start with and you didn't anticipate to start with. You might have a sense of, like, I want them to be sort of this kind of person, but then when you get down into the details, and it's the nuance that I think
yeah,
really, brings in the really interesting bits that readers like. I know I like that as a reader. So that is something that by the time you even get to halfway through the book, you're going, this is a completely different person from the first scene. So you do
yeah,
have to go back and rethink the dialogue and some of the motivations based on who they've become towards the end of the book. So that's how it works for me. I would
yeah.
imagine that's fairly common.
I think that's like a bit like life, isn't it? Really, that's sort of like how life sort of works out. Is that you start off in one direction and then you end up veering into wherever you go.
Mm,
And I think that's sort of part of, I guess you said people do say that, they take on their own life, but actually it's interesting how you said it, that's because you get to know them, and you just sort of think, well, they wouldn't do that, or they would do that. And I guess in the beginning you might think, well, I'm going to do that and they're going to do that, but actually when you get to halfway through the book you think, well, she wouldn't do that, or that just wouldn't happen. So I
mm.
guess that's sort of them taking their own thing. It's like you said, it's just them, you sort of fine tuning them, really.
Yeah. And I think you've done something right when that happens.
Yeah,
If they're still the same at the start, at the end as they were at the start, then something's gone wrong there. They should develop. They should become more nuanced and have their personalities, almost
yeah,
like a baby. Baby starts out, it's just a baby, and then as they get older, you can see their personalities coming
yeah.
through. And this is like, just your babies at the start, and then they develop as you go on.
They grow along as you go. Yeah. So Bridget, what was your journey to being published? How did that sort of come about for you? Did you always want to write?
Yeah, I think always from like childhood, um, I always loved books, stories, reading. I was always sort of had my head buried in a book. Um, I think, like, I would have written stories, and just when I was a kid or whatever. But I think my school experience wasn't that great. My secondary school experience, and it was kind of very, you know, kind of a harsh enough environment, and any notion that you could become a writer, that would have been just like, what?
Yeah,
Like, you need to get a real job, or you need to get a job. So I kind of think that, um, I always had that notion in my head of, I wanted to write, but I didn't really know how I would go about it, and I didn't know enough to know that there was actual courses you could do as well, and that was a bona fide route. And although it's not like another profession where you train to be an engineer and then you can go and look for jobs as an engineer, whatever field of engineering that you're in, it doesn't quite work like that, because you can be as good or as bad, and there are no jobs in the papers. It
yeah, no.
doesn't work like that. But I started writing them when I was in my 20s. So that was the first time I thought seriously about actually writing, and I
Yeah,
didn't tell anybody because I just felt really embarrassed about it, because I thought, I'm probably rubbish at this. And people are going to laugh. So it was like this, almost like a secret drinker. I was like a secret
writer.
drinker. So I was like writing and just, and nobody really would have known. I might have told the odd person along the way. And then when you're living your life and you're like, I went to university and and took a different career path. I took a very, went into computer science. I took this very, practical route.
Yeah.
Like, thought that's what I had to do. I had to, get a real job, and you know, so you're working hard at all that to try and make this life for yourself, and then you've got this other dream that you're trying to pursue and sort. And for me, it was very like I had to be very determined to carve out time always, and I found that I had to figure everything out myself, like the long way, the hard way, the round the houses way. Because I wasn't doing it in the open, and then where somebody might say to you, you could do this, or there's such and such, So I think I was sort of making it harder for myself by not maybe talking enough about it and being open about it. God, you think I was talking about something that was criminal or something? I was just saying I had no kind of self-confidence about it.
But then I guess if you've always been in that, and I think when I went to school, particularly girls back then were not sort of encouraged to do anything creative. I mean, that wasn't a real job, It was, you can be a typist, or you can, so I completely understand what you mean. Is it like you just wouldn't have said, I want to be a writer, but whereas now I think you could.
I think you could, and I think people, it's like it's more open, and
people are more.
You would have been just like laughed at by everybody, and it's like, because I do remember that, like, even at school, like saying that I wanted to be a teacher, to the careers teacher, and she smirked at me, and I thought, right. Well, I did become a teacher. I was a lecturer for a while, but it was so repetitive. I couldn't stay at it. But it was just, I was teaching the wrong kind of subject as well. It was in computer science. I didn't really like it that much. So it was my own stuff really. But schools are more off-putting than encouraging, and so I started writing, and talk about planning. I just sat down and started with a blank page writing, and thinking, oh, that's how you do it. I'm like, God. So when you do it that way, you make every mistake in the book, and you get everything wrong, and then you figure out slowly, oh, right, it needs to be this. And then I would have read books about creative writing, and then in more recent years, then there's been some really good online creative writing courses. So you don't have to up sticks and go and find a master's degree somewhere and find £15,000 to pay for it. And, you can actually, from your own house, just pay for a course online. And like any of these things, they're as good as the effort you put into them. So the more you work at them, the more you're going to get out of them. And I did quite a few with Curtis Brown Creative. The Curtis Brown agency. That's such a good wee academy they've got. And I know there are others. I've not tried them, but I've heard about other people saying that they've been to other places and they're really good as well. But Curtis Brown, I thought, were really good, and it was reasonably priced. It wasn't going to leave you, like selling the house or anything like that. So it was all very manageable, and that definitely completely up the game. And then I also began to kind of feel less self-conscious about it all. I think that was like a big moment for me, that I didn't feel so self-conscious. I didn't care if I told somebody, and so what if they laughed, and and so what if it wasn't very good, that kind of thing. So I developed confidence in it myself, and I ended up just like I always wanted to be a writer. And then I realized, well, I am actually writing. I'm not an author, but I'm writing. So I'm actually doing it. And that was kind of a light bulb moment as well. And then trying to get published is a whole completely different ball game, because um, they say make your work as good as it can possibly be, polish
Yeah.
it until it's shining, and if you do query letters, tailor them, research your agents. I was doing all that. I did everything possible, and I got this really great editor as well at one of um, um, P.N. Johnson is a guy that was in one of the courses that I did, and he's an author now as well. And he told me about this editor, Lindsay White, and I had editors before that charged quite a lot of money, and the end result wasn't very good. So I kind of was a bit cynical, but I
Yeah.
trust his judgment. He said, "Look, she's really so good," and I think as well, getting her to look at my work and having a professional person comment on it. And I was getting, she, she gave me really good critical feedback that, um, that allowed me to see things that maybe I just wasn't getting quite right. I think that the skills were there at that point because I'd done the
Yeah.
courses, but there were things then that maybe I was just falling down on, and she was able to point out a lot. And so putting it through that filter was a huge step forward as well. And then I got something that was, I knew it was like a really, like, I knew it had been independently assessed, and somebody said, this, if an agent got this, they would definitely want to read more than just the first three chapters.
Yeah.
So I felt kind of confident about that. And then I went back out to agents, and it was like the same as always, getting nowhere again. So that was when I actually decided to, you know, use an independent publisher. And they're
Yeah.
kind of new on the scene as well, because before it was just so closed. It was traditional publishers, that's it,
Yeah.
or self-publishing, which I think is just, I just didn't want to do that. But
No.
independent publishers give you sort of a halfway house, and
Yeah.
so that's what I ended up doing, going through that route. And a part of me wishes that I'd got the agent and a publishing deal and all that, but that's not what happened. And
No.
I think it's better to have something published and you've
Definitely.
written a story and have somebody read it rather than it never seeing the light of day.
And also, if you have got something out there, quite often, I'll talk to people who, are on book sort of 5 or 6, but book 1, 2, and 3 again with sort of, with an independent publisher or self-published. But then when they got to book 4 or 5, then somebody picked them up, and then they go back and they look at their sort of back catalog. So you never know once you're out there and sort of
Yeah,
in print that you're. And I think it's really interesting, the editing, that even authors who've been writing for years still need that critical eye, don't they? Of like, the
yeah,
editors seem to know, that's their job. They know what sells, they know what works. But I guess that's quite difficult when you put so many, particularly in the beginning when you start, to someone to, you know, not character assassinate your work, but I guess it can feel like that.
yeah. I mean, you have to just get over that, really, And I think because I had done, I'd been in academia and got used to kind of my work being critiqued.
Yeah.
I didn't mind that so much. Actually, somebody just criticizing you and saying this is rubbish, that is absolutely horrible, because you don't know what to do with that. But
No.
somebody giving you critical feedback and being able to say this is what's wrong, or this is what's not working, or whatever, then that's the best kind of feedback you can get.
Yeah.
That's better than somebody saying, "Oh, I really like that," because maybe they really did, but there's maybe things
Doesn't give you
wrong.
anything, does it, to work with?
And it feels nice, and it's nice, but I think if you're trying to make the work as good as it can be, it's great to have somebody that can really give you that critical feedback.
Yeah.
And you just learn to kind of, I think when you, no matter how many times you see it, when you've written something and you're getting that first feedback, you're
Yeah.
just like, oh God, right. But then you look at it and go, yeah, then no, that's fair enough. And then you get into the revisions, and then you've got something even better. So
Yeah.
it's the only way to look at it, I think, to do it that way. But and I actually kind of like the revision process. That I like getting the first draft done, and then I know how long the piece of string is, and
Yeah.
I can go back and start shaping it and polishing it, and it's I don't mind that.
No, that's funny because some people absolutely hate editing and some people absolutely love it as the part of the process. Some people will sort of bang out the first draft and then, they really enjoy that, like you said, like the editing and the polishing. Whereas some people almost want it to be perfect when they send off the first draft. So I guess it's just all different, isn't
It's
it?
all the
People have
different
different, yeah.
exactly.
Who's inspired your writing?
Um, I think I've, down the years, I've sort of changed. But when I was a kid growing up, well, the common thing is that I've always liked sort of mysteries. I've always liked twists. I was more drawn to stories like that. I think we all read sort of children's classics and classic stories, through school or through our own reading as children. But the things that always drew me in were sort of mysteries or things, psychological kind
Yeah,
of stories. And that's what I try to write myself, because I think, well, that's what I enjoy most. That's what I would like to read most. So early on, like say, as I sort of getting into my teens, like I really liked Agatha Christie's work, so I read a
yeah,
lot of that. And then I got into, I sort of I really got into Stephen King for a long time. I mean, I know that's kind of horror, but his stuff is horror, sort of in a sense, although he's changed it a bit over the years. But the way he wrote characters, I mean, you talk about characterization. He's
yeah,
like a master of that, and so he could write some really creepy folks.
yeah,
And I think I got a lot from that as well, from him. Although, um, yeah, I sort of also got a bit kind of moved on from that, from his as well. But I think the others that I liked, I liked George Orwell. I liked a lot of his work, and
yeah,
Oscar Wilde, and um, I liked Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, that was kind of very, very dark in a lot of ways.
yeah,
Um, I think I got into Wilkie Collins for a while. I just stumbled on one of his books, and then Ira Levin, I really liked, and Ray Bradbury. So I kind of there was a kind of a mix of people that I liked,
yeah.
as well as sort of your usual kind of classic writers. So I find now that that what I read now is more. Um, I read about how to make my writing better. I read a lot of that, or I read a lot of more um, kind of textbooks. Well, not so much textbooks, but kind of more about politics and facts, and that
So
I'm
more,
not reading as much fiction, but I've
yeah,
but that really informs my writing as well, because um, there's a kind of an undercurrent of a certain worldview, political worldview under the writing, and maybe not such an undercurrent. And the first book I got published, more there was a lot of there was an eco crime in that, so I was able to bring out a lot of issues about climate and about how we treat the environment. And
yeah,
and the one I'm writing now that I'm hoping to get published next it's set in 2050, and it's got a lot of climate and political change as a backdrop. So I find that the kind of factual texts now that they sort of inform what I want to write about
yeah,
more than fiction does. Um, but the but fiction as well. I don't know if this happens to writers, but people say when if they're actors or they're directors or something, they can't really enjoy a film anymore because they're hearing the director go cut, or they can see the acting. And it's almost like when I'm reading fiction, I can't stop myself from going, I would have said that differently, or like, oh yeah, I see what they're doing here. It's like I'm dissecting it instead of just enjoying it. So I've kind of spoiled fiction for myself. But yeah, so like that would be sort of the trajectory for me down the years.
That is interesting, because some people I know will say, oh, I can't read fiction, I can't read crime when I'm writing a crime book, or I can't read romance when I'm writing a romance book. So they'll read a different genre, but actually that's quite, unique to be able to. But I guess that's because what you write is what you read was what you write is what you read. If you haven't got another genre to go to particularly, or that you don't want to, then I guess, it's interesting how you've sort of gone to.
And I have changed. I have come out of that, and there was a time when I just I didn't stop reading. It was like, if I didn't have a book in my hand, but I still have a book in my hand, but it's not
a different book.
Not as likely to be fiction anymore. And maybe I just need to actually maybe go back to it and try and not be so analytical about it when I read it, or just enjoy it.
Yeah, you maybe have to go for something. What you said about, like, you were sort of doing sort of 2050. So is that sort of like more? Is that like dystopian sort of? Is that sort of going to be? Or
it's definitely. I don't want it to be dystopian, because I think it's too easy to write dystopian work, in the sense that, I mean, everything being a disaster, we're in dystopia, nearly where we are now. But I wouldn't want to write something about the future that just makes people feel even worse, and almost like it's doomism.
Yeah.
So it's actually something that's saying, no, we're doing. It's a transition between where we are now and where we want to get to. So it hasn't quite reached the end result of where things maybe are going to be okay. It's still in that kind of that in between place, but it's trying to say that people are addressing the big existential problems, and that they're actually doing something about it, and the world is going in the right direction. So that's where kind of how I've said it, and it's
more of a positive outlook.
Absolutely, because I couldn't forgive myself if I wrote something. It'd be just, I could easily do that, but I couldn't forgive myself, because like it's everybody's expecting it to be a disaster, and it's almost like there's no point in doing anything about it because it's going to be a disaster, and I just don't want to contribute to that. So that's why I want to write something that's a sense of positivity. But in the middle of it, like at the core of it, that's the backdrop. At the core of it, it's like a why done it. So it's like something happens at the start, and the protagonist then has to go through the whole book, like, why did this happen? And as she gets closer and closer to the truth, and then there's kind of a reveal at the end that hopefully is kind of interesting, or otherwise it's not much of a book. But
so when will that one be? When do you hope that one will be sort of out and about?
Late next year, early the following year. So I've almost finished the first draft, so it's like close to that. So then there'll be a few revisions, and then
Brilliant.
So that's the aim. The thing is now, I mean, it doesn't matter if nobody ends up reading anything I write, but when you get that bug, you can't. It would be so weird for me not to write now. So I'll just always keep writing, and it's just such an amazing thing to do. It's the thing I just find so enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's amazing in itself, but actually, we've got, is it 27,000 people on this on our group, so wow. you've just just a few more people will be picking things up, and we really always like to sort of promote new authors that people might not have come across. So yes, it's been great to chat to you, and I'm really interested. I really enjoyed. I'm going to read book 1 because I have this one's book 2. But yeah, I really enjoyed you were writing, and it was quite different to what I quite liked the way it goes. So it's a little bit different than, so. But thank you for coming on. Thank you to everybody for listening, and good luck. And we'll hopefully come on again and tell us about in the future.
I will do. Thank you so much. It's been lovely chatting to you. It's just got rid of all the nerves straight away.
Yeah, well, hopefully it wasn't as scary as I hoped it wouldn't be. So no, it was just good.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much,
very
Karen.
much.
Okay,
Thank
take
you.
care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.